In the meantime, the United Nations Human Rights Commissioner Volker Turk has expressed grave concern for the people of Niger and calls on the generals to immediately restore constitutional order. Spokesperson for the UN Human Rights Office, Safina Shamdasani, made this known during a press briefing in Geneva, Switzerland. Defense leaders from West Africa's ECOWAS bloc, who began a meeting in Ghana on Thursday, have agreed to activate a standby force as a last resort to restore democracy in Niger after generals toppled and detained President Mohamed Bazoum last month.
UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk expresses grave concern for the people of Niger, who have been forced to endure even more misery following last month's military coup. He calls on the generals to immediately restore constitutional order. Niger is one of the poorest countries in the world, extremely vulnerable to climate change. The people have already been through so much hardship over the years. Now the very people who they elected to build a pathway to end their destitution have been removed by force against the constitutional order and detained by the coup leaders. They must be released at once and
Now, joining me live to unpack this latest development is David Urto, Director for the Geneva Center for Africa Security and Strategic Studies. Thank you very much, David, for joining us today at Continental Prime tonight.
Thank you for having me, Edwinger.
Now, David, all member states except those on the military rule and Cape Verde have agreed to activate a standby force as a last resort to restore democracy in Niger. What do you make of this latest development, and do you see them actually carrying out this threat?
It's very unlikely. If you follow the discussions at the defense chiefs meeting, they've made it very clear that the deployment of a standby force is on condition that dialogue fails. So it's more or less a tool of last resort. We also know, as you rightly mentioned, that not all member states of ECOWAS are actually in support of a standby force. Cape Verde, including Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, and of course Niger. So that effectively will render any military deployment a challenge. Concerning also added to the fact that you have countries that have shared the same borders with Niger, including Chad, Algeria, and Libya. Those countries are possibly going to provide some kind of a bulwark or an escape route and a challenge for any military deployment should those countries not side with ECOWAS, force deployment. We also know, Benga, that the African Union has made it very clear, in some respect, that it prefers to go the dialogue route, and to only perhaps consider any military intervention as a matter of last resort. So there is a very unlikely scenario for us to see any ECOWAS boots on ground. And mind you, it takes more than meetings or perhaps two meetings that we've seen, one in Abuja and now one in, yes. So it takes more than two meetings, just one we've seen in Abuja and the other in Ghana, to, come up with what I describe as a possible war plan. So we're still to see more, but I believe that, ECOWAS has to show that it is tough. It has to show that it can go the extra mile. But there is no readiness, from my experience in terms of force deployment. We haven't seen any tarmac signs, to indicate that ECOWAS is indeed, going to deploy forces in Niger. And, of course, I very much doubt, as many before me have said, that a force deployment might not even achieve its mission. So together with many voices, we believe that dialogue should be the priority. And this is why, and this is how I think ECOWAS also believes. They want, to, win by dialogue rather than in the battlefield.
Now, David, the key word we've heard is the military intervention will be as a last resort. At what point do we get to that? Do we cross the Rubicon? And do you think ECOWAS has exhausted all other options that could be adopted to resolve this issue?
I think it hasn't, and that is why it has continued to say that this will be a last resort. They still have the military junta in the Niger Republic. I think it's just last week that they did open up an avenue through the Islamic scholars, the ulamas, saying that they're ready for talks. We haven't seen those talks take place. My, speculation is that the military junta, which is already appointed 21 ministers, appointed 8 regional governors, I believe that what they would do, in any event that they do have these talks with or dialogue with ECOWAS, they would propose to ECOWAS a set date, perhaps 1 or 2 years for a transitional period, whereby democratic elections will be held. I think this is what would happen. And once that happens, ECOWAS may perhaps, try to cut short of, the time frame that the military junta would propose. But it's very difficult now in terms of timing to see the military junta restoring or reinstating President Bazoum. I think, that, train has left the station. What we're expected to see at this point in time is some kind of balance of arguments based on how long does it take to reinstate a democratic system and hold elections. That's where I think the biggest discussions will be. But yeah, go ahead.
Now, David, you did say that that train has left the station and that the junta is digging in and consolidating. We also remember we're still dealing with the effect of the blowback from NATO's intervention in Libya to topple strongman Muammar Gaddafi. What will be the implication of an ECOWAS intervention force if they do carry out their threat and intervene militarily on the region?
It will be a catastrophic consequences. For once, as you rightly mentioned, we haven't seen any evidence that this is going to be a battle for Niamey, whereby ECOWAS will storm the presidential palace and reinstate President Bazoum. It's not as easy as that. Remember, ECOWAS is not a country; it's a bloc. Effectively, what that means is that in the event that ECOWAS storms, Niger Republic, there is a possibility that they would fight back. They might throw bombs in Nigeria or any other ECOWAS member states, and the whole region will be alive. We also know that Niger Republic has allies, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Guinea. We do not know how many more allies it does have. We've, heard of rumors of Wagner, positioning itself to the help of the military junta. So effectively what we might have, if in the event, and very unlikely that ECOWAS do deploy its forces, we might have some kind of a repeat of what we've seen in Ukraine, whereby Russia thought, it was a simple military operation, short time. We saw the same thing happening in Ethiopia. And again, you mentioned Libya. We're still, experiencing the consequences, today. America went into Afghanistan thinking that it would be a very short and rapid intervention. 20 years later, they replaced the Taliban with the Taliban. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the impact of any regional war, especially on a country like Nigeria, that is experiencing its own critical security issues. Yeah. There is no appetite, there is no evidence so far by ECOWAS that it will succeed in its mission. They do not have a timeline. They might have the clock. So it's going to be a difficult one. Go ahead, sorry.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, David Otto, Director for Geneva's Center for Africa Security and Strategic Studies, joining us from Nigeria's federal capital, Abuja. We do appreciate your time and insights.
Thank you.